Hey, lovebirds. Welcome back to Hearts Wine from Heart's Distractions. I'm your host, and today we're diving deep into a topic that makes even the most rock solid relationships feel a little wobbly. Love or convenience? Are we really in love or just comfortable? Now, I know the title probably already got you thinking. Maybe you're looking at your partner across the room wondering if you're really still in love or just comfortable. Perhaps you're questioning whether you've outgrown the passion of the early days of your relationship and have settled into something more routine. And here's the kicker. Sometimes we don't even know if we're in love anymore or if we're simply sticking around because it's easy. It's easy to stay where you are, especially when you've built a life together, shared experiences, and created some kind of stability. But let's be real. Comfort is nice, but when was the last time that comfort really set your soul on fire? So today, let's dive into this gray area of love versus convenience, shall we? Are you in a relationship built on genuine emotional connection? Or are you there because it's simply what you know and it's easy? Stick with me on this one because we'll be breaking down what makes love truly lasting, what makes a relationship comfortable but maybe stagnant, and how you can tell if you're in the right relationship for the right reasons. Plus, I've got some controversial thoughts to share with you all, of course, or I wouldn't be me. Let's get real and tap into the wine or tears. Better yet, let's pour a glass of wine or your favorite beverage to dive into this uncomfortable but juicy topic you all are dying to hear the punchlines for. I'm your relationship expert with over 20 years of professional and personal experience. Now I get to be your host in addition to being a wife, a mother, a marriage and family therapist. And if you didn't know, I'm someone who's passionate about helping people navigate the ups and downs of love and relationships. I understand relationships on all levels while also recognizing and calling out the things that most don't acknowledge, including family, friendships, and how mental health plays out in relationships. I'm also a relationship coach, an entrepreneur, and the author of Distractions of the Heart, a poetry book all about the messy, beautiful emotions and relationships we experience and carry in our hearts, which is available on Amazon. So please go check it out and leave a really good review, if I might ask. And when I'm not having deep conversations or helping others, you might catch me mixing up a drink or two. Yeah, I'm a bit of a mixologist at heart and enjoy coming up with new flavored cocktails. So grab your glass of wine, get comfortable, and let's talk about all the heart's distractions that cause your heart to whine in your new favorite relationship podcast. All right, let's kick this thing off by talking about something every couple will face at some point: the shift from passion to comfort. That honeymoon phase, or I've heard it called the cupcake stage, that consists of the butterflies, the late night talks, the sweaty palms when you hold hands. It's the stuff of romantic movies. But what happens after that? Where does that intense passion go? The truth is, relationships change. The early sparks are meant to fade. But let me tell you something. Sometimes what follows that fade isn't passion, it's comfort. Comfort is like that favorite blanket you've had for years. It's familiar, cozy, and just, safe. But comfortable relationships run the risk of growing stale. Now, I'm not saying that comfort is inherently bad, but If you find yourself in a relationship where the emotional intensity has dried up and you're not sure if you're still in love, or if you've just gotten used to each other, that's when we need to dig deeper and recognize there needs to be a new way of connecting to get back to real love, as Mary J. Blige would say. When things start to get comfortable, you might start noticing that instead of having those deep, vulnerable conversations, you're talking about bills, work, and the same old routine. You settled into your roles, your habits, and your routine, and while it's predictable and easy, it might lack the passion that once made your heart race. Real talk? There's a fine line between comfort and complacency. Sometimes couples confuse the two, thinking that because they're comfortable, it must mean they're still in love. But comfort can mask dissatisfaction. Comfort can make you settle for something that feels safe instead of something that excites you. It might be easier to stay in a relationship that's comfortable rather than confronting the hard work of reigniting that emotional spark. I'm going to let that one sink in for y'all for a minute. If I can maybe give you a story of a couple, let's call them Sam and Mia. They started their relationship with fireworks, like most couples. They couldn't keep their hands off each other, stayed up all night talking, and made wild plans about the future. But after 3 years together, they slipped into routine. Mia started feeling like Sam was more like a roommate than a lover. She noticed they hadn't been on a real date in over a year. The passion was gone, replaced with comfort and convenience. Does this sound familiar? Maybe you're thinking, that's me. That's where I am right now. Well, I'm going to tell you, it's totally normal for passion to evolve. But it's important to recognize when the connection is missing. We'll talk more about how to reignite passion later, but first, let's ask ourselves a key question. What is love? Let's talk about love from a scientific perspective, shall we? Now, love isn't just a feeling. It's a complex mix of emotions, biological processes, and psychological factors. The key question here is, what separates love from convenience? And why do people sometimes stay in relationships that might not seem as passionate as they once were? To answer that, we have to understand how love works on a deeper level. The first thing we need to understand is attachment theory. This theory, popularized by the psychologist John Bowlby, explains that our earliest relationships, particularly with our caregivers, set the foundation for how we form bonds throughout our lives. So, if you grew up in a home where emotional connection was stable, you're likely to seek that connection in your adult relationships. But if your attachment was insecure, you might find yourself either overly dependent or overly distant in your relationships, even when you're comfortable with someone. If you haven't heard my previous episode on attachment styles, go back and listen to that. I go way more deeper into that for y'all. But love in its purest sense involves a deep emotional connection and a sense of fulfillment. But convenience, well, that's more about habit, familiarity, and sometimes even a lack of desire to change. You know, the longer we're with someone, the more likely we are to start feeling like this is just how things are. There's comfort in that. But when does comfort start to edge out real love? The research also points out that biologically, our brains release chemicals like dopamine, oxytocin, and serotonin when we're in love. These chemicals make us feel good and connected. But in long-term relationships, those same chemicals can decrease over time if the relationship doesn't continue to challenge us or grow in some way. When that happens, many couples fall into routines that feel safe but lack the spark they once had. In fact, a study by the American Psychological Association found that the brain activity of couples who've been together for a while shows decreased levels of love chemicals compared to when they first started dating. But this isn't necessarily bad. And in many cases, the brain adjusts to being in a secure, stable relationship. But here's the kicker. If that's all that's left, comfort without passion, then the relationship risks stagnating. Think about that one. And I know most of y'all are saying, so what's the solution? Is it all just about finding new ways to reconnect emotionally? Or is it time to admit that maybe you're just comfortable and that's okay? Let's explore that more by looking at some signs that might help us distinguish between being in love and simply being comfortable. Well, I'm going to take a moment first to define love for you. You might think you know what love is. Most of us think we do. But when was the last time you really thought about it? We talk about it all the time. I love you. I'm in love with you. But what does it actually mean? When we're talking about long-term love, we're not just talking about those initial sparks. We're talking about commitment, trust, shared values, and mutual respect. Real love is about being vulnerable and about growing together, supporting each other through thick and thin. It's not about staying just because it's convenient. It's about choosing each other every single day, even when it's not easy. I want to take a moment and share a powerful quote with you from The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. Love is not just a feeling. It is an action, a commitment to care for someone even when it's difficult. This hits home because love isn't just something you feel. It's something you do. It's how you show up. It's your actions matching your words that correlate with your feelings. That was for the true lovers out there who understood what I just said. But can we go back to my story about Sam and Mia for a moment? Because in this case, comfort had overtaken love for them. They weren't actively working on their emotional connection. They were just, there. But real love is intentional. It's about continuously nurturing the relationship and working through the challenges. It's about maintaining that emotional intimacy and being attuned to each other's needs. So how do you tell the difference between real love and simply being comfortable? Real love doesn't let complacency set in. Real love pushes you to grow individually and as a couple. But love also takes work that most people don't want to do. No one can just coast through a relationship and expect it to stay healthy. Just like a plant needs water and sunlight to grow, love needs communication, effort, consistency, dedication, empathy, and vulnerability. I think I just said a word that most people didn't like to hear. I'm going to give you another example of this from a couple I know, but we're going to call them Miguel and Lauren, who have been married for about 12 years. They went through a phase where they got too comfortable. Their love felt more like friendship than romance, but they decided to do the hard work of reconnecting. They started setting aside time for date nights, talked about their emotional needs, and slowly reignited the romance. Their relationship wasn't just built on convenience anymore. It was built on love, real and deep connection. So, if you're wondering, are we in love or is this just a convenience thing? Ask yourself, are you both choosing to be there for each other? Or are you just going through the motions? Yep, let that one sink in. All right, so now that we've defined love and examined the shift from passion to comfort, let's dig into why we stay in relationships when convenience takes over. Okay. I'm here to tell you we stay because we are pulled into what we call the comfort trap. Ask yourself, why do we stay in relationships when we've moved beyond love and into something more like habit or convenience? There are a lot of reasons, but here are some of the most common ones I felt all my couples and those newly dating should be aware of. The first one, fear of change. And we all know change is scary. And relationships that have been long-term feel like home. When you've invested years into someone, leaving is a huge emotional risk. If you don't have the courage to face change, it's easy to stay because it feels safe. Number 2, financial concerns. Now let's be real. Money can make or break relationships. Y'all know what I'm talking about. If you built a financial life with someone, it can be hard to imagine splitting everything, especially with divorce or even just separating. Often has financial implications. So couples stay because it's easier than dealing with the practicalities of splitting assets, bills, and responsibilities. Number 3, my favorite because I'm a mom, children. Parents often stay in relationships because they want to keep the family intact for their kids. But the question we need to ask is, are we doing more harm by staying in a relationship that's based on convenience rather than love? Children are perceptive, and they can feel when there's tension or emotional distance between parents. And this is where parents fall short because they are not taking into account the intelligence or awareness their children have in these moments to make a better decision for all. But instead, are making decisions based on comfort and not recognizing even children have to learn how to adapt to change, as it can be a good teaching moment and lesson for long-term success in life. And I'm gonna tell y'all, I had to learn that lesson the hard way after being in a toxic relationship where I had to deal with emotional and financial abuse. I had to make a hard decision when my daughter was 3 years old. That wasn't easy, to have to, one, uproot our lives in a relationship, as well as the possibility of messing up the relationship with her and her other parent, which, by the way, did happen. So there are a lot of things, yes, you have to take into account for. But at the end of the day, you as well as your children have to be happy. You and your children have to be safe. And yes, there needs to be a plan put in place to ensure those things. But don't be afraid to choose you, especially if you are not in love and you're staying for convenience. And I'm going to tell you, for me, I'd rather have love than convenience. All right. So, number 4, fear of loneliness. This one is huge, y'all. Woo. According to Psychology Today, 61% of people in long-term relationships fear being alone more than they fear dissatisfaction in their current relationships. That fear of loneliness often keeps people stuck, even when they know the relationship has outgrown its love. But staying in a relationship out of fear or convenience doesn't lead to growth. It often leads to resentment, emotional numbness, and unspoken dissatisfaction. Let's think about that for a second, shall we? And I'm going to give you the last one, number 5. We call this the sunk cost fallacy. Have you ever heard of the sunk cost fallacy? It's the idea that the more time, energy, or resources you invest in something, the harder it is to walk away, even if it's not serving you anymore. This happens in relationships all the time. Even worse, when the opinions of family and friends become involved to where the couple not only internalizes these opinions to make informed decisions for their relationship or marriage, but they stick to them. People think, I've already spent 10 years with this person. I can't leave now. But here's the truth. Just because you've invested time in something doesn't mean you should keep investing in it if it's no longer fulfilling you or serving you purpose, and other opinions shouldn't count. Time spent in a relationship is not a reason to stay, especially if you're unhappy. I'm going to give you a couple stories on these issues here, just so we can have a better understanding of what this looks like in real time. Let's say I had this friend who stayed in a relationship for 15 years because she felt like she had already put in so much time. She kept thinking, I can't walk away now, not after everything we've built. But what she realized later was that staying out of obligation only made her more miserable. And when she finally left, she told me, I should have done this years ago. Let's say I had these other friends that are a couple. Let's call them Sarah and James. They were pretty much high school sweethearts, married at the age of 22. And now, in their early 40s, they're struggling with whether they're truly in love or just comfortable. But here's the kicker. They both admit that the passion and excitement they once had has faded. But that's not the whole story. See, while Sarah and James didn't fight or have major issues, they found themselves slipping into autopilot. Sarah admitted, I don't know if I'm still in love with him or just used to him. I don't feel the same spark anymore, but we've been together for so long. It feels like I'm betraying him if I say something. What Sarah and James are experiencing is the comfort trap that many couples fall into after the initial honeymoon phase. They have a shared history, a home, routines, and obligations, but that sense of passion that once defined their connection has faded. What many couples need to do is to intentionally create new experiences that reignite those deeper feelings of love. It's possible, but it requires effort. Okay, I think I'm going to give y'all one more. Let's say I have another couple that I've worked with. Let's call them Tariq and Lena. Let's say this couple were about to break up after 5 years of dating. They were comfortable, but they had grown distant. Tariq was career-driven, and Lena was focused on her art. They spent less time together, didn't communicate their emotional needs, and were each stuck in their own world. But one night, after a huge argument, they finally sat down and had an honest conversation. What they realized was that they were both afraid of being alone, afraid of change. But once they worked through their fear, they realized they weren't just comfortable. They were still in love. What they needed wasn't more time apart. It was more time together with intention. So Tariq and Lena's story shows us that sometimes it's a wake-up call that reminds us why we're together. When love gets clouded by complacency, it takes effort, communication, and vulnerability to rediscover it. Okay, I lied. I'm gonna give y'all extra one because I actually like this story as I'm remembering it as I'm talking to y'all. Of another couple that I had. Let's call them Carlos and Maya. A couple in their late 20s. Their story is about breaking free from societal and family expectations. Carlos and Maya, they come from different cultural backgrounds, and their families had certain expectations about their roles in the relationship. Initially, they fell into traditional roles, which felt comfortable but didn't make them happy. Maya was expected to be the primary caregiver and homemaker, while Carlos took on the breadwinner role. Over time, both of them felt stifled by these roles. Carlos realized that he was relying on convenience, the comfort of fulfilling societal expectations, rather than truly supporting Maya's dreams and their shared future. It wasn't until they had a deep conversation about their values and needs that they both realized the love they shared was worth evolving. Now, Carlos and Maya's story is about redefining love, and love doesn't have to look like society's picture. It can be something uniquely yours, whether both partners support and grow together. This story shows that even when you're comfortable in the roles you've assumed, it's crucial to ask yourself, is this fulfilling for both of us? So, what do we learn from these stories? Or what did we learn from these stories? Well, relationships are fluid. They can grow and evolve, but they also require intention. You can't expect to stay comfortable and also expect deep emotional connection and fulfillment. Love and growth go hand in hand, right? But can we go back for a second and talk about the major thing in the comfort trap that often gets overlooked? Fear. Fear is one of the biggest reasons people stay in relationships that may no longer serve them. Fear of being alone, fear of change, fear of disrupting what's comfortable, or even fear of the unknown. First, let's dive a little deeper into the fear of being alone. According to Psychology Today, over 40% of people who are unhappy in their relationships stay because they're terrified of ending up alone. It's a powerful force, y'all. The thought of being single can trigger feelings of rejection, inadequacy, or even loneliness. And for some people, the idea of facing life without a partner feels too daunting, especially if they've been with someone for a long time. Let that one sink in. But here's the problem. When we stay out of fear of being alone, we're not choosing love. We're choosing comfort. And that kind of comfort is built on insecurity. It might feel safe in the short term, but it's not healthy in the long run. Then there's the fear of change. Relationships, especially long-term ones, become familiar. You know how your partner reacts to things, what they like to eat, how they take their coffee, and all those little quirks that make them them. But what happens if change comes? What if they suddenly want something more? Like moving to a new city, or changing careers, or even just exploring new hobbies that don't include you. In some relationships, change feels like a threat to the stability you've worked so hard to build. But guess what? Change is inevitable. Staying stuck in the status quo can often mean that your relationship is on autopilot. And if you don't take active steps to evolve together, you risk letting comfort lead to complacency. Hear me on this, people. And let's not forget the fear of disappointing family or society. This is especially true for couples in long-term commitments or marriages. Sometimes the idea of separating from a partner, someone who your family or friends have invested time and energy into, feels like betrayal. Even if your heart isn't fully in a relationship anymore, societal or familiar expectations can weigh heavily. We often stay for the people around us, not because we truly want to stay. But here's the thing. Fear is often the opposite of love. Love is built on trust, choice, and growth. Fear keeps us small, stagnant, and stuck in patterns that no longer serve us. I hope y'all heard what I just said right there. But Now that we've gotten fear out of the way, I think we should cover something even more crucial: how to tell if you're truly in love or if you've just fallen into a comfortable routine. It's not always easy to distinguish, especially after being in a relationship for a while. But if you're paying attention, there are certain signs that will tell you whether you're truly emotionally connected or if you've just fallen into a pattern of routine. So let's break that down, shall we? First, let's talk about passion versus routine. Passion is exciting. Again, it's those butterflies, those moments when you feel alive just being near your partner. But as we all know, passion can fade and emotional connection can change over time. But there's a big difference between a relationship that's simply comfortable and one that's deeply fulfilling. The question is, when it fades, does it make space for something even more meaningful? Or do you end up stuck in a routine that feels like a comfortable lull? Well, I'll tell you, the difference between love and comfort often shows up in the way you feel about your future together. When you're in love, you imagine growing together, facing challenges together. You feel like your partner's in something greater than just a relationship. But when you're just comfortable, you start thinking more about logistics. What time do we eat dinner? What movie should we watch? It's not about growing together. It's about existing together. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But if you're looking for something deeper, it can feel unsatisfying to just sit in comfort. Now let's talk about emotional connection versus obligation. True emotional connection means you're sharing vulnerabilities, feelings, and support. There's mutual respect, empathy, and care. But in a comfortable relationship, sometimes there's this feeling that you're just going through the motions. You might find yourself spending more time on your phone, zoning out during conversations, or feeling like your partner is someone you're stuck with instead of someone you're choosing. Oh my goodness. I'm going to say that again in a short way. Your partner might be someone you're stuck with versus someone you're choosing. Okay. Here's a fun fact though. According to marriage and family therapy study, couples who report staying together purely out of convenience or routine often describe their emotional connection as familiar rather than fulfilling. They feel more like roommates than romantic partners. All right, I'm going to share a quick example of this for y'all. One of my couples I've had, let's call them Sarah and Mike. So Sarah and Mike's been in a relationship for about over 10 years. They loved each other, but they admitted that their relationship had become more like a partnership than a romance. Their routines were comfortable. Sarah would cook dinner, Mike would take care of the lawn, and they'd watch TV together before bed. They weren't unhappy, but they weren't exactly thrilled either. They realized that passion was missing, but they didn't know what to do about it, so they stayed comfortable. Are y'all seeing the patterns here? When you're truly in love, you don't just exist next to each other. You thrive together. But comfort can easily trick us into thinking we're in love when in reality, we've just gotten good at doing life side by side. Now, let's go over, let's say, the top 10 red flags that show you or your partner is in a relationship for comfort and not love. So the first one, you stop trying to impress each other. When you first start dating someone, you're trying to impress them. Dressing up, planning dates, and putting in extra comfort. But once the honeymoon phase is over, you may find yourself slipping into routine. You stop planning surprises, and the little things you once did for each other fade away. This doesn't necessarily mean the love is gone, but it could be a sign that you've become comfortable to the point of complacency. Number 2, your conversations are becoming surface level. When you're truly in love, you share deep, meaningful conversations. You talk about your dreams, fears, goals, and even vulnerabilities. But when you're just comfortable, the conversations can become repetitive or shallow, talking about work, dinner plans, or other practicalities, but avoiding discussions about your emotional needs or future plans together. Number 3, you feel more like roommates than partners. This one's a big one. In a relationship, you should feel like you're on the same team, sharing a life, supporting each other's goals, and being emotionally intimate. But when you're just comfortable, you might find yourselves living in the same space, but emotionally disconnected. You're more like roommates who are just going through the motions of everyday life. Number 4, you're settling for emotional disconnection. When love is alive in your relationship, both partners feel emotionally fulfilled. But if you find that you're tolerating emotional disconnection, feeling ignored, unappreciated, or just going through the motions, it's a major red flag. Comfort often leads people to settle for emotional neglect because they're afraid of change or confrontation. Number 5, you avoid difficult conversations. In a healthy relationship, it's normal to have tough conversations about feelings, challenges, or issues in the relationship. But when you're comfortable, you might avoid these conversations. Afraid of rocking the boat, you might say? If you're ignoring or avoiding discussing important issues just to keep the peace, it may be a sign that you're more comfortable than in love. Number 6, you don't make each other a priority. When love is present, you prioritize each other's needs, even when life gets busy. But if you settled into comfort, you may find that your partner becomes an afterthought. You're no longer making the extra effort to prioritize them and other things like work, hobbies, or friends. These tend to come before your partner. Number 7, your intimacy feels routine or forced. Physical intimacy should be a natural expression of love, but when you're just comfortable, it can feel like a routine or even forced. You might go through the motions without feeling emotionally connected or excited. This can be particularly true if you no longer prioritize physical touch, affection, or quality time together. Number 8, you're just sticking around for convenience. Sometimes people stay in relationships for purely logistical reasons, such as living together, shared finances, or the ease of familiarity. When you're in a relationship for comfort, the why behind staying together can become more about avoiding change or the inconvenience of starting over rather than a deep emotional connection. 9, you're afraid of change or growth. In loving relationships, both partners grow together. However, when comfort takes over, growth can feel like a threat. Maybe you're afraid to change because it could alter the dynamic, or you resist growth because the familiar feels safe. But if you're not evolving together, then you might just be sticking to what's comfortable instead of challenging yourselves to love more deeply. And 10, you're just simply not excited about the future. When you're in love, you're excited about your future together. You talk about goals, dreams, and adventures you want to share. But if the future feels uncertain or uninspiring, and you're no longer planning ahead or talking about next steps, it could be a sign that the relationship has slipped into comfort mode. You're not in love anymore. you're just coasting. So, now that we've gone over the red flags, how many of these resonate with you? Do any of these signs ring true in your relationship? We often get stuck in comfort, especially in long-term relationships, but it's crucial to recognize when that's happening. The key is to reawaken that sense of excitement, vulnerability, and mutual growth. So, what can you do about it? First, why not reflect on your own relationship? If you identify with several of these red flags, it might be time to check in with your partner. Don't just accept the comfort and assume that's enough. Ask yourself, are you still truly in love? Or are you simply settling into what feels easy? You deserve more than just convenience. You deserve passion, connection, and real emotional intimacy. Now, let's dive into something that might not be as obvious, but is incredibly important when we're asking ourselves whether we're staying in a relationship because of love or convenience. The generational patterns we inherit. This is something that most don't think about. We often think of our relationships as our relationships, individually shaped by who we are as people, but the reality is we're not making decisions in a vacuum. We're influenced by the patterns and beliefs that have been passed down through the generations before us. You see, generational patterns, how our parents, grandparents, and even great-grandparents handle relationships, can have a huge impact on the decisions we make in our own romantic lives. Whether we're consciously aware of it or not, many of us carry the weight of these inherited behaviors, ideas, and expectations. It's like we're wearing a pair of rose-colored glasses that were handed down to us, and sometimes those glasses don't help us see clearly what's best for our relationships today versus what was acceptable in previous generations within our families. Let's break this down a little more, shall we? Whether we had a front row seat to a loving marriage or watched two people endure a relationship of convenience, our parents' relationship, or lack thereof, has a lasting effect on how we view partnerships. Take a moment and think about the relationship you grew up witnessing. If your parents stayed together for the kids, or because they felt it was their duty to stay married despite what's happening in the marriage, like infidelity, abuse, selfish behaviors, or your own trauma spilling over, you name it, you might begin to subconsciously believe that this is what relationships are supposed to look like. You might internalize this as the right thing to do, even if deep down you feel disconnected from your partner. You might even stay in a relationship you're not truly in love with because, in your mind, that's what commitment looks like. Holding on for the sake of something greater than yourself. On the flip side, if you've witnessed a healthy, loving marriage where both partners thrived and grew together, it might be holding your partner to a very high standard of love, expecting the same emotional connection and depth. This could lead to frustration if you're in a relationship that has lost its spark or isn't meeting those idealized standards, even if the relationship is otherwise stable and comfortable. Let's take a couple. Let's say their names are Nia and Darius, who are two people who grew up in very different households. Nia's parents were married for 35 years, but it was clear their love had faded long before the divorce happened. They stayed together for financial security and for the children. Nia witnessed a relationship that existed more out of obligation than genuine connection. For her, love and convenience were always intertwined, and she didn't know how to separate the two. Darius, on the other hand, had parents who still held hands and laughed together. His parents were in love, they communicated openly, and they showed affection. For Darius, Love was the priority. It wasn't just about staying together. It was about staying in love. When Nia and Darius's relationship began to face difficulties, Nia was quick to dismiss their problems and stay for the sake of the relationship, while Darius kept thinking, if we're not in love, what's the point? Their differing upbringings created friction as Nia's inherited pattern of staying out of duty conflicted with Darius's idealism about love. Okay. So we all know generational patterns aren't just shaped by our parents. They're also shaped by the cultural and society we're immersed in. The ideas surrounding what marriage and relationships should look like can vary widely based on societal pressures. And in some cultures, divorce is seen as a taboo, something to be avoided at all costs, no matter the emotional toll it takes. In others, the idea of staying in a relationship out of convenience is normalized, especially when financial stability, children, or status are involved. Society's norms can influence whether or not we feel allowed to leave a relationship when it's no longer fulfilling, or whether we feel pressured to stay and endure because that's the expectation. This is particularly prevalent in generations where divorce rates were lower, and staying in an unhappy marriage was often seen as a moral obligation rather than a personal choice. I'm going to give y'all an example of this. In some Asian and Middle Eastern cultures, the idea of marriage is rooted in family honor and a collective well-being. The decision to stay in a relationship is often tied to the idea of family reputation. Love, while important, is sometimes seen as secondary to maintaining harmony, supporting children, or upholding the family's social standing. This can create a situation where couples stay together because it's expected, regardless of their personal happiness. In contrast, the more liberal mindset found in many Western societies emphasizes individual happiness and emotional fulfillment. Here, relationships are often viewed as fluid. It's okay to change partners if it's not working any longer. But this can also create its own pressure, as there's often an emphasis on finding the perfect relationship, which can lead to frustration when reality doesn't meet expectations. Sometimes couples stay together because they're afraid of repeating the mistakes of the past, whether it's the mistakes their parents made or mistakes from their own past relationships. If your parents had a toxic relationship and you're determined not to follow their footsteps, you may find yourself staying in a relationship because you're afraid of failure, even if love has faded. You're subconsciously repeating the pattern of staying for the wrong reasons because you're terrified of ending up like your parents, or even worse, like their failed relationships. I'm going to give you an example of this one. Let's call this couple Derek and Leela. Derek and Leela had a tumultuous relationship in their early 20s, marked by infidelity and emotional abuse. Both came from families where toxic relationships had been their norm. Derek, in particular, wanted to avoid being like his father, who had stayed in an unloving marriage for decades. In his mind, if he stayed with Lila, even if it was just out of habit, he was already making a better choice than his father ever did. But both knew deep down that they were no longer in love, but they stayed together because they didn't want to repeat their family's mistakes. These are classic cases of the fear of repeating history pattern, where the focus on avoiding failure ends up leading to staying for the wrong reasons. Lastly, we need to talk about codependency and how it has been passed down through generations. In some families, the concept of codependence is so deeply embedded that it becomes normalized. In these families, relationships often thrive on the idea that both partners need each other to survive. Love becomes a necessity rather than a choice at this point, And partners often find themselves staying because they can't imagine being without the other person. It's about survival, not emotional connection at this point. This generational pact often sets up unhealthy patterns where partners stay together out of obligation and not love. The idea of breaking away, of choosing self-love, is terrifying because it means rejecting the foundation upon which the relationship has always stood, which is dependence. But how can we begin to break these patterns? Awareness is the first step in breaking generational patterns. By recognizing how our parents' relationships, our culture, and societal norms have influenced our decisions about love and convenience, we can take control of our relationship choices. It's okay to reject patterns that no longer serve us. So I want you all to take some time to ask yourself questions like, what was the model of love I grew up with? What do I believe about relationships because of my family history? What relationship patterns have I inherited that I need to unlearn? How can I create a healthier relationship model for myself and future generations? Breaking generational patterns isn't easy, but it's a powerful way to ensure that we're choosing love and not just convenience. And trust. These are questions that I typically ask a lot of my couples to help them dig a little deeper, to know if they want to be together because they love each other, or to figure out if they're just with each other just for convenience. Okay, so here's where things get real quick. If you've been in a relationship for a while, you've probably noticed that initial chemistry you had in the beginning is not always so obvious anymore. But here's the thing, just because passion fades doesn't mean it has to be gone forever. And it certainly doesn't mean that love is gone. Passion is like a fire. It needs to be stoked. If you're looking at your relationship and wondering, can we get that spark back? The answer is yes, but it takes work. You can't just expect the fire to magically reappear, but you can add some fuel to it and watch it burn bright again. So how do we reignite that passion? First, let's talk about the obstacles that might be in the way. We get caught in ruts. It happens. We fall into the rhythm of daily life, and before we know it, we've stopped prioritizing each other. Routine, kids, work, it all piles up. When was the last time you and your partner did something spontaneous? Something that was just for you two? If it's been a while, don't feel guilty, but know that it's time to change that. I'm reminded of this couple. Let's call them Alex and Riley. They've been together for 5 years, and the last two had been particularly boring. They were both in careers that left them mentally drained by the end of the day, and by the time they got home, they just collapsed. But after a friend challenged them to rediscover each other, they took small steps to reignite the romance. They started going on date days on Saturdays instead of running errands. They even scheduled time to talk about anything except work. Slowly but surely, they rekindled that spark. Passion doesn't thrive in an emotionally distant relationship. Did y'all know that? In fact, if you're feeling disconnected, it's no wonder that the physical intimacy isn't there either. Emotional intimacy is the bedrock of passion. You need to feel heard, supported, and emotionally safe to let your guard down. I'm going to give you another example. Let's call this couple Sophia and Daniel, who's been together for about 8 years. And after their second child was born, they barely communicated. Daniel spent all of his time at work, and Sophia focused on the kids. They were comfortable, but emotionally disconnected. After recognizing that their emotional bond had withered, they decided to make time for deep conversations. They started sharing their hopes, fears, and frustrations again. As they emotionally reconnected, their physical intimacy followed. Hello. So, we already talked about comfort earlier, but here's the thing. Sometimes the comfort zone can make us lazy. We fall into routines that don't require effort, whether it's the way we communicate or the way we love. We stop trying to impress each other. We stop making each other feel special. If you want to reignite passion, you need to step outside of that zone and take risks again. Do something unexpected. Surprise your partner. Make them feel seen, loved, and desired in a way that goes beyond the daily grind. If you're sitting there wondering, but how do we break out of the comfort zone? How do you break free from complacency in a relationship? How do you reignite passion and rediscover emotional intimacy? I'm here to tell you, first things first, self-reflection. You need to ask yourself, am I still choosing my partner every day? Love is a choice. It's easy to get stuck in the comfort zone where things just happen. But if you're not making intentional choices to keep the love alive, it's going to fizzle. So, start with reflection. Are you still excited about your partner? Do you still value them the same way? Second, create new experiences together. One of the best ways to get out of a rut is to do something new together. Travel somewhere new. Try a new hobby, a new dish, or even just change up your routine. The key is to break out of autopilot mode and create opportunities for connection. Third, communicate openly and vulnerably. One of the easiest ways to get comfortable is to stop talking. Maybe it's easier to avoid difficult conversations, but those are the very conversations that can deepen your connection. Open up, people. Be vulnerable. Ask your partner what they need and share what you need. It starts with communication. Have that conversation with your partner. I love you, but I miss you. I miss the excitement. I miss feeling like we're new again. Then talk about how you can bring that feeling back. And lastly, remember the small things. Sometimes love isn't about grand gestures. It's about the little things. The way you greet your partner when they come home. The thoughtful messages. The times you just hold each other. These small acts of love can build a bridge over the distance that comfort might have created. It's like what Dr. John Gottman, a marriage expert, says. The key to a long-lasting, successful marriage is not just passion. It's also keeping curiosity about each other alive. Keep discovering your partner every single day. And a personal favorite quote from yours truly, yes, of course, me, and that is, in order for your relationship to sail, you first have to understand why it is anchored. Let that sink in. Now, we've covered the signs that passion might be fading, and we've talked about ways to reignite it. But let's get real. Sometimes it's not about reigniting passion. Sometimes it's about asking yourself, is this relationship worth saving? If you're questioning whether you're in love or just staying out of convenience, then you need to ask some tough questions. And these are the hard ones, the ones we avoid. But let's face it, if you're in a relationship that no longer serves you, maybe it's time to rethink things. Relationships are about growth, but individually and as a couple. If you're feeling stagnant, like you're not progressing, then it might be a sign that things have placated. Ask yourself, are we still evolving together? Are we creating new experiences together? Are we still cheering each other on in our personal lives? You see, a relationship built solely on comfort won't help either partner grow. A couple that's stagnant doesn't challenge each other to reach new heights. Growth keeps things fresh and exciting. And when growth stops, so can love, because love requires a space where both partners continue to evolve, learn, and contribute to the relationship. Now let's get brutally honest here. If you're staying in a relationship simply because it's easy or convenient, but your emotional or physical needs aren't being met, then it's time to take stock. It's easy to settle for less than we deserve, especially when we're afraid of the alternative. But relationships are supposed to fulfill your needs, not just your partner's needs, but your own too. Are you feeling fulfilled in this relationship? If you're not being heard, loved the way you want, or experiencing the physical intimacy you crave, then it's time to evaluate whether staying is truly serving you. And as I mentioned earlier, the fear of loneliness often keeps people trapped in relationships that no longer serve them. But fear of being alone should not be the reason you stay. You are whole as an individual. You don't need another person to complete you. It's true that loneliness is tough, but it's better to be alone than to feel emotionally lonely in a relationship that's become about convenience. At this point, I'm thinking about a friend that I used to have. Let's call her Emily. She stayed in a relationship for years because she was afraid of being alone. But when she finally let go of that fear and ended it, she realized that she was far happier on her own, taking care of herself, discovering her interest again. She regained a sense of self-worth that had been buried for a long time. And the time that she spent getting to know herself, loving herself, pouring back into herself, it just made her much better for the next relationship. But here's the point. You can find joy and fulfillment within yourself. And then, yes, you'll attract the right kind of love that isn't built on convenience. Take that one in. Now that we've heard some real life stories, let's dive into some controversial questions. Because no episode of Heart's Wine from Heart's Distraction is complete without stirring the pot a little bit, right? Here's the first one. Should people stay together for convenience? I want you to think about this for a second. If you're in a relationship where the passion has waned, but the comfort is still there, maybe it feels easier to just keep things going to avoid the hassle of breaking up. But is that okay? Is staying for convenience really that bad? Some say yes, because it can be practical. Maybe there are kids involved, financial ties, or a strong community connection. But others argue that staying together for convenience is dishonest, not to yourself and not to your partner. You're living a life that doesn't reflect your true feelings. So what do you think? Is convenience a good enough reason to stay? Or should love and the pursuit of passion always be the driving force? Next up, is staying in a relationship out of comfort dishonest? This is a tricky one. Are you being unfair to your partner by staying in a relationship that doesn't make you feel alive anymore? Some people argue that if you're not fully invested emotionally, you're pretty much being dishonest about your true desires, aren't you? But on the other hand, maybe you're still providing care, companionship, and stability. Does that count for something? It's not always clear cut, but it's something every couple has to ask themselves, or at least I think they should. And the third question, can a relationship thrive without passion and just companionship? We often talk about passion as the key ingredient for love to thrive. But what about those relationships where the passion fizzles out, yet the companionship remains strong? Maybe you're not having intense romantic moments anymore, but you enjoy each other's company, respect each other, and share a life together. Can that kind of relationship work? Or do you need more than that to keep things alive? Let's take a moment here. What do you think? I'm going to throw these questions out to you on social media because I want to hear your thoughts. And I want you to share your opinions, your experiences, and let's continue this conversation on Instagram, TikTok, or Facebook. I'd love to know how you all feel about these tough questions. So, let's sum it all up, shall we? At the end of the day, love is so much more than just convenience. Relationships are about growth, connection, vulnerability, and continual effort. Passion may fade, but that doesn't mean you can't bring it back. And if you find yourself questioning whether you're still in love or just comfortable, take a step back and really think about it. Ask yourself the tough questions. Are you still growing together? Are your needs being met? Do you feel fulfilled emotionally and physically? If you're truly in love, you'll work to make the relationship more than just a habit. You'll put in the effort to nurture and cultivate that connection. But if you're simply comfortable, maybe it's time to have a real conversation with your partner about what the future holds. Thank you all so much for tuning in to today's episode of Hearts Wine from Harsh Distractions. I know this is a heavy topic, but it's an important one. Relationships are complex, and it's okay to feel conflicted. Don't shy away from asking the big questions. Keep the communication open, and remember that love is a choice that requires ongoing care. Before we wrap up, don't forget to subscribe to Hearts Wine from Harsh Distractions YouTube channel for exclusive episodes and content. And head over to www.aliciasdistractions.com for more resources and updates. You can also follow us on social media on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook so we can keep the conversation going. And until next time, keep loving, keep growing, and don't forget that every tear we shed is just part of the wine of life. Cheers!